Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling a system that I think a lot of us just take it for granted.
Oh, absolutely.
We tend to think of it as just the plumbing, right?
Yeah.
Just a series of, dumb pipes moving fluid from point A to point B. If the heart is working, then the pipes they just exist.
It is probably the most common misconception in all of cardiovascular medicine. I mean, we see the heart as the hero, right? It's the pump, the electrical marvel.
Of course.
And the vessels, we treat them like PVC piping in a basement. Passive.
Yeah.
Inert. They're just conduit.
Exactly. But today, we are going to completely dismantle that idea. We are diving into a synthesis of Robbins and Cotran's chapter on blood vessels and the corresponding chapter in Underwood's pathology.
Chapter 11 in Robbins, 13 in Underwood for those following along.
Right. And it turns out these aren't just pipes. They are dynamic living organs. They grow, they shrink, they heal, they remodel, and here's the scary part. They actively conspire in some of the deadliest diseases we face.
That is the crucial pivot. That's the whole point. When you look at the source material, particularly the way Robbins frames it, you realize that vascular pathology isn't just about a pipe getting clogged with grease like a kitchen sink.
Yeah.
It is about a complex, active, biological response to injury. The vessel wall itself is a participant. It recruits immune cells, it changes its own shape, and sometimes it decides to sacrifice the organ it's supposed to be feeding.
That is a terrifying thought, that the supply line decides to cut off the troops. So our mission today is to synthesize these two major texts. We're using Robbins for that heavy-hitting systems framework, the deep molecular mechanisms, the how and the why.
Right. Robbins gives you the blueprint.
And then we're using Underwood to ground us in the clinical reality, what does this actually look like in a patient side of things?
Precisely. And as always, a quick disclaimer. This discussion is a conceptual map. It's a framework. It is a synthesis to help you organize your thinking and your revision.
It is not a substitute for sitting down and reading the chapters.
Absolutely not. You still need to see those diagrams. You need to see the histology, especially for the molecular pathways we were about to discuss.
Absolutely. Reading remains essential. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of plaques and aneurysms and all that, let's set our North Stars for this deep dive. What are the big takeaway ideas we need to keep in mind so we don't get lost in the weeds?
Okay, good idea. I would say there are 5 key takeaways that really anchor this entire discussion. First, as we've already hinted, vessels are active participants. They are not passive.
Not just pipes?
Not just pipes. They regulate flow, pressure, and immune traffic. They are constantly sensing and responding.
Okay, active participants. Got it.
Second, and this is the big one, the endothelium is king.
The endothelium.
If you learn nothing else today, learn this. Endothelial dysfunction is the first domino in almost all vascular pathology. It's that single, delicate layer of cells that separates the blood from the tissue, and when it gets angry, bad things happen.
We're going to talk a lot about that single layer of cells. It's the gatekeepers, really.
It is the gatekeeper. Third key takeaway, atherosclerosis is inflammatory.
Right.
It is a chronic immune response. It is not just a plumbing issue of grease in a pipe. It is a fire in the wall.
A fire in the wall. I like that. What's number 4?
Fourth, hypertension is essentially a pressure injury. That constant force, it forces the vessel wall to remodel structurally, to thicken and harden. We'll talk about arteriolosclerosis.
And the 5th.
And fifth, just structural integrity matters. When the matrix of the wall fails, when the concrete and the rebar start to crumble, that's when we get the real catastrophes. That's when we get aneurysms and dissections.
Okay, that's a fantastic roadmap. So let's unpack this. To understand how these things work, we first have to understand how they're built. Let's start with section 1. The normal structure and function, or as you called it, the architecture of flow.
It's a beautiful architecture, really. And generally, when you look at a vessel, specifically an artery, you are looking at a 3-layered cake. And the thickness and composition of those layers changes dramatically depending on where you are in the body.
Okay, so let's walk through the layers from the inside out. Imagine you are a red blood cell floating in the stream. What are you looking at? What's the first thing you see?
You're looking right at the intima. This is the innermost layer. And it consists of that critical single layer of endothelial cells sitting on a basement membrane.
Just one cell thick.
Just one cell thick. Underneath that, there's a tiny bit of connective tissue. But that's basically it. It is incredibly thin and delicate.
But despite being so thin, you said it's doing the heavy lifting in terms of signaling.
Is the command center.
Yeah.
Is the brain of the vessel wall. Then moving outward, you hit the media.
The middle layer.
The media. This is the muscle layer. In arteries, this is thick, composed of smooth muscle cells and a protein called elastin. This provides the contractile power to squeeze and the elasticity to stretch.
Okay, and then on the very outside.
On the outside is the adventitia. Think of this as the support scaffolding. It's looser connective tissue, it has nerve fibers, and it tethers the vessel to the surrounding tissue so it doesn't just flop around.
Now, there's a detail in the adventitia that I found absolutely fascinating in Robbins. It's a concept I think a lot of people miss. The vasa vasorum.
Ah, yes. The vessels of the vessels.
It sounds so meta, but it makes perfect sense when you actually stop and think about the physics of it.
It does. It's a brilliant piece of design. If you think about a really large artery, like the aorta, the wall is incredibly thick. I mean, it has to be, to withstand the massive pressure of the heart pumping directly into it.
Right.
But here's the irony. The blood flowing inside the lumen, the main channel, is full of oxygen and nutrients, right? But it can't diffuse all the way out to the outer layers of that thick wall.
Because diffusion only works over very, very short distances, millimeters or less.
Exactly. The inner part of the wall, the intima, and the intermedia, they steal all the oxygen. By the time you get to the outer media and the adventitia, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
So the outer wall needs its own dedicated blood supply. It needs its own plumbing system.
So you have tiny little arteries running through the outer wall of the big artery, just to feed the big artery's wall.
Correct. And that becomes a critical vulnerability later on, particularly when we talk about aortic dissection.
Why is it a vulnerability?
Well, think about it. If those tiny vessels, the vasa vasorum, get crushed, say, by chronic high blood pressure or damaged by inflammation.
When the big vessel starves.
The big vessel starves. It dies from the outside in.
Wow.
It rots. And a rotting wall can't hold back arterial blood pressure.
That is a perfect example of how function follows form. And speaking of form, the texts make a big deal of distinguishing between different types of arteries based on what their specific job is. Because the aorta doesn't do the same job as, say, an artery in my finger.
Exactly right. You have your elastic arteries first. These are the aorta and its major branches, the subclavian, the common carotid. Their media is just packed with layers of elastin. Under a microscope, it looks like tree rings or just sheets of rubber bands stacked on top of each other.
Why do they need so much rubber? What's the point of all that elasticity?
It's because the heart doesn't pump in a continuous stream, it pulsates. It's bang, rest, bang, rest.
Systole and diastole.
Right. When the heart squeezes systole, it ejects this huge bolus of blood. The aorta has to expand to catch it. It stores that kinetic energy in its stretchy, elastic wall.
It's like stretching a rubber band.
Exactly like stretching a rubber band. Then, when the heart rests diastole, the aortic valve closes, and the stretched aorta recoils, it snaps back. That recoil is what pushes the blood forward while the heart is filling up again.
So it converts the jerky stop-start flow of the heart into a relatively continuous, smooth flow for the organs down the line.
It's incredibly clever engineering. It dampens the pulse.
But Robbins points out that as we age, we lose that elasticity. The rubber dries out and cracks, essentially.
We call them pipe stem arteries. They become rigid, calcified tubes. So when the heart pumps, the tube doesn't expand to absorb the shock. The pressure just shoots up massively. That's systolic hypertension.
And then what happens during diastole?
Well, it drops like a stone because there is no elastic recoil to maintain the pressure.
So the pulse pressure? The difference between the top number, systolic, and the bottom number, diastolic, it gets really wide.
Exactly. You might see someone with a blood pressure of 170/70. That huge gap tells you their great vessels are stiff.
Okay, so from the big elastic arteries, we move down to the muscular arteries.
Right, like the coronary arteries, the renal arteries. These are the distributors.
Yeah.
Their main job is to regulate where the blood goes. You don't need full flow to your stomach when you're running a marathon.
So they need to be able to clamp down or open up.
Which is why their media is mostly smooth muscle. They are the valves of the system directing traffic.
And then we get to the really small ones, the arterioles. The texts call these the taps of the system.
They are the taps. They are the principal points of physiologic resistance in the entire circulatory system.
I want to dig into the math on this for a second because Robbins specifically mentions the inverse fourth power law.
Ah, yes. Quasu's law.
It sounds intimidating, but let's just break it down. What it means is that very small changes in the diameter of these little vessels have huge consequences for flow, right?
Correct. It's not a linear relationship, it's exponential. Think of a garden hose. If you squeeze the nozzle just a tiny bit, the water sprays out much, much harder. The resistance skyrockets.
So what does that mean, fourth power?
It means that if you have the radius of the vessel, if you make it just a tiny bit smaller, the resistance to flow doesn't double. It doesn't even quadruple. It goes up by a factor of 16.
16 times from having the radius.
2 to the power of 4. It is incredibly sensitive. This is why the body uses arterioles to control systemic blood pressure. A tiny microscopic twitch of the smooth muscle in your arterioles all over your body can cause your blood pressure to skyrocket or plummet.
That really puts the whole hypertension discussion into perspective. It's a game of fractions of millimeters.
It really is.
Okay, and then finally we get down to the absolute smallest level, the capillaries.
The exchange zone. This is where the real business of staying alive happens. It's just an endothelial cell wrapped into a tube with a little helper cell called a parasite clinging to the outside. No media, no adventitia. The diameter is about the size of a single red blood cell.
So the cells have to go through single files.
Single file. That maximizes the time for oxygen to get out and CO2 to get in. And then finally the veins.
The storage tanks.
Exactly. Large diameter, very thin walls. They're floppy. They have a high capacitance, meaning they can hold a lot of volume without the pressure going up very much. At any given time, they're holding about 2/3 of your total blood volume.
Just sitting there, waiting to be called back to the heart.
Yep. They are the reservoir.
So that's the anatomy. But we need to zoom back in on the hero, or maybe the potential villain of our story. The endothelial cell. You called it king earlier. That seems like a pretty big title for a cell so thin you can barely see it.
It absolutely earns that title because it is the sensing interface. It sits right there at the border between the flowing blood and the static tissue. And in its normal, healthy basal state, it has a very specific personality.
A personality.
You can think of it that way. It's non-thrombogenic, meaning it is incredibly slippery. It produces factors that actively prevent clotting. It makes nitric oxide to tell the smooth muscle layer underneath to stay relaxed. It's impermeable. It is, in essence, a peacekeeper.
But it has a dark side. It can be provoked.
It does. And this is the concept of endothelial activation. It's not just a simple on-off switch. It's a whole spectrum of behavior. If that cell senses something is wrong, turbulent blood flow, cytokines from an infection, bacterial products, high lipids, smoke toxins, it changes its personality completely.
It stops being the peacekeeper.
It becomes the aggressor. It becomes sticky. It starts expressing these molecules on its surface called adhesion molecules. You can think of them like little Velcro hooks.
What are they hooking?
They're designed to grab onto white blood cells, leukocytes, that are flowing by in the blood. It stops making nitric oxide, so the vessel clamps down. It becomes procoagulant, so it's ready to form a clot. It becomes leaky. It becomes pro-inflammatory.
And the why here is really interesting. This isn't a mistake in the system. It's a defense mechanism, right? Evolutionarily, this makes perfect sense.
Exactly. Imagine a tiger bites you. You want your vessels to activate at the site of the wound. You want them to clamp down to stop bleeding. That's vasoconstriction. You want them to form a clot. That's procoagulant. And you want them to grab immune cells and pull them into the tissue to fight off any bacteria from the tiger's mouth.
It's a survival response.
It is a brilliant, localized survival response. The problem, and this is really the central theme of this entire deep dive, is when this activation becomes chronic and widespread.
When the switch gets stuck in the on position.
Stuck on because of chronic smoking, or high cholesterol, or high blood pressure, or diabetes. That is when the conduits of life become the primary sites of disease. You are constantly fighting a tiger that isn't there.
Which leads us perfectly into our second section, the response to injury. Because when a vessel gets hurt, it doesn't have a million different ways to react. It's not that creative, is it?
It's a very stereotyped response. It's almost like a knee-jerk reflex.
Yeah.
Whether the injury is from an immune attack or mechanical stress or a chemical toxin, the vessel wall responds with one main trick. Intimal thickening.
Intimal thickening. Okay, walk us through this. So the endothelium gets angry, it gets activated, it sends out distress signals. Then what happens?
Those distress signals, those cytokines and growth factors, are heard by the smooth muscle cells, SMCs, in the media, the layer below. Now, normally these cells are just sitting there. Their job is to contract and relax their muscle. But upon receiving these injury signals, they do something remarkable. They migrate. They actually start to crawl from the media, they punch through the elastic barrier, and they move into the intima, that inner layer.
And when they get there, they undergo what the books call a phenotype switch. This part blew my mind. They stop being muscles.
This is fascinating biology.
Yeah.
They fundamentally change their job description. They stop being contractile muscles, and they become
What does that mean, synthetic?
They start acting like fibroblasts or like little construction workers. They lose their ability to contract. They start to divide and multiply. And most importantly, they start spitting out huge amounts of collagen and extracellular matrix.
Okay, but why? Why would the body want its muscle cells to stop contracting and start acting like construction workers?
Imagine you have a leak in a pipe. You don't need the pipe to squeeze harder. You need a patch. You need some cement. These cells sacrifice their primary job contraction to become a construction crew. They build what's called a neointima, a new, thickened, scarred-down inner layer to cover the site of injury.
So they're literally building a scar inside the artery.
Essentially, yes. And in the short term, it works. It heals the wall, it stabilizes it so it doesn't rupture. But there's a huge cost. By building this thick scar layer on the inside of the pipe, you are narrowing the lumen. You are blocking flow.
And this is the fundamental mechanism behind restenosis after you put a stent in, right?
Yeah.
Squish the plaque with a balloon and a stent, but in doing so, you injure the wall.
And the wall's only response is to heal by growing a new scar layer through the mesh of the stent.
Exactly. And you said this is also the foundation of atherosclerosis.
It is the absolute foundation. The atherosclerotic plaque is essentially a chaotic, chronic, lipid-fueled version of this exact healing process gone haywire.
Okay, let's go there. Section 3, atherosclerosis. This is the big one. The books say it causes what? Half of all deaths in the Western world?
It is the monster in the room. And first, we should probably make a quick distinction because you'll hear two terms: arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis.
I feel like a lot of people use them interchangeably. Are they not the same thing?
In casual conversation, maybe. But pathologically, no. Arteriosclerosis is a very generic term. It literally just means hardening of the arteries. It can refer to a few different processes, and it happens to all of us to some degree as we age. The walls just get stiffer.
Okay.
Atherosclerosis is a specific type of arteriosclerosis. The athero part comes from the Greek for gruel or porridge. It's hardening with these specific gruel-like, lipid-rich plaques.
Right. And Underwood makes a point that this starts incredibly early. We aren't just talking about old men here. He mentions fatty streaks in childhood.
Yes, and this is a really sobering thought. If you look at the aorta from an autopsy of a 10-year-old, you will often see these little yellow streaks on the intimal surface. They are flat. They don't block flow at all. And if you look under a microscope, they are nothing but macrophages stuffed with lipid, foam cells.
Are those permanent?
At that stage, they are thought to be reversible. If you fix the diet, if you fix the underlying risk factors, they can actually regress and go away.
But if you don't?
They are the seeds. They are the initial lesion from which the full-blown plaque will grow over the next few decades.
So how do we get from a reversible fatty streak in a kid to a killer plaque in a 50-year-old? Robbins lays out the modern response to injury hypothesis. It's a drama in 5 acts. Let's step through it.
Sounds good. Act 1 is chronic endothelial injury or dysfunction.
The king gets angry.
The king gets angry. The trigger could be hemodynamic stress, that constant turbulent blood flow at branch points. That's why plaques absolutely love to form where arteries split like the carotid bifurcation.
Or it could be chemical, like toxins from smoking?
Or hyperlipidemia itself.
Yeah.
High levels of cholesterol are directly toxic to the endothelium.
Okay, so the endothelium is injured. Act 2, accumulation.
Because the endothelium is injured, it becomes leaky. It's no longer a tight barrier. So lipoproteins, specifically LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol leak from the blood, into the vessel wall, into the intima.
They get stuck there.
They get stuck. But here is the absolutely crucial step. Once trapped, they get oxidized by free radicals produced by the inflamed cells.
Oxidized LDL, that's basically rancid fat, right?
That's a great way to think about it. And the body hates it. The immune system views oxidized LDL as a foreign invader, like a bacteria or a virus. It is highly toxic and pro-inflammatory.
So the immune system comes running in, which is Act 3, inflammation.
Macrophages from the blood are recruited. They squeeze through the leaky endothelium. They have these specialized receptors on their surface called scavenger receptors. Their job is to clean up the mess. They start eating the oxidized LDL.
The cleanup crew arrives.
But there is a fundamental design flaw in the system. Usually when a cell eats something like glucose, it has a feedback mechanism to stop when it's full.
Right.
Scavenger receptors don't have an off switch. The macrophages just keep eating and eating and eating until they are literally stuffed to the bursting point with rancid fat.
And they become foam cells.
Yes. Under a microscope, their cytoplasm looks all bubbly and foamy because it's packed with all these little lipid droplets. This leads to Act 4, which is sort of the aha moment in modern atherosclerosis research, the inflammasome.
Right, the NLRP3 inflammasome. This was a specific call-out in Robbins, and it sounded really important.
It is the smoking gun. It's the molecular link that proves the connection between metabolism and immunity in this disease. What happens is some of that cholesterol inside the overstuffed macrophage forms sharp, needle-like crystals.
Physical crystals.
Physical crystals, and they literally poke holes in the internal machinery of the cell. This physical damage activates a protein complex inside the macrophage called the NLRP3 inflammasome.
And what does activating that do?
It triggers a cascade that results in the release of a potent, screaming hot inflammatory cytokine called interleukin-1 beta.
IL-1 beta.
And that just pours gasoline on the fire. It calls in more immune cells, T cells, more macrophages. This is the definitive proof that atherosclerosis isn't just sludge or grease in a pipe. It is a raging, self-perpetuating, autoimmune, inflammatory fire burning inside the vessel wall.
That explains so much. It explains why systemic inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, CRP, are such strong predictors of heart attacks. You're measuring the fire, not just the fuel.
You're measuring the fire, exactly. You can have totally normal cholesterol levels but high inflammation, and you are still at major risk because that fire is burning in your artery walls.
Okay, so we've had injury, accumulation, inflammation. What's Act 5?
Act 5 is the misguided attempt to heal. All those inflammatory signals call in the smooth muscle cells from the media.
The construction crew.
The construction crew arrives at the scene of the fire. They migrate over this festering pit of foam cells and inflammation, and they try to build a roof over it. They lay down collagen and matrix to create what we call a fibrous cap.
So the final morphology, the structure of the plaque, is a necrotic core at the bottom, full of dead foam cells, lipid debris, and those cholesterol crystals, all covered by a fibrous cap of collagen and smooth muscle cells, trying to keep it all contained.
That is the mature atherosclerotic plaque. And now the vessel has a very serious problem.
It does try to hide it for a while, though, right? The Glagoff phenomenon.
It's a really sneaky adaptation.
Yeah.
Initially, as the plaque begins to grow inward into the wall, the vessel remodels outward. It actually expands the outer diameter of the artery to keep the channel for blood, open.
It's like hiding dirt under the rug. The room looks clean, but the lump is growing.
Perfect analogy. And this is why you can have significant, dangerous disease with zero symptoms for decades. The flow isn't compromised yet.
Until it is.
Until the plaque gets so big that the outward remodeling can't compensate anymore. Then it starts to grow inward and encroach on the lumen. When you get to what we call critical stenosis, usually around 70% occlusion, that's when you start getting symptoms.
Like stable angina?
Right. At rest, you're fine. You get enough blood flow. But if you try to run for a bus, your heart's demand for oxygen goes way up, but the narrowed pipe can't deliver any more flow. You get ischemic chest pain.
You stop running, the demand goes down, the pain goes away.
Exactly. Predictable.
Yeah.
Stable. But stable angina isn't usually what kills people suddenly. The real killer is acute plaque change.
The rupture.
The rupture. And this comes from what we call the vulnerable plaque. Now, these plaques are terrifying because they often don't cause the most severe stenosis. A vulnerable plaque might only be blocking 40% or 50% of the artery. You might have a normal stress test.
So why are they so much more dangerous?
It's all about their structure.
Yeah.
A vulnerable plaque has a very thin, flimsy, fibrous cap. It is a huge, soft, liquid-like lipid core. And most importantly, it is teeming with inflammatory cells, especially macrophages.
And the inflammation is the enemy of the cap.
It's the saboteur. Those activated inflammatory cells release enzymes called MMPS matrix metalloproteinases. These enzymes are designed to break down collagen. They're literally chewing up the fibrous cap from the inside out, weakening it day by day.
They are sabotaging the containment wall.
They're digging a tunnel out of the prison, and then one day, maybe you get angry or you lift something heavy, your blood pressure spikes just for a moment. The mechanical stress on that thinned, weakened cap is too much. It snaps. It ruptures.
And the necrotic core, the gruel, is exposed to the blood.
And that core is highly, highly thrombogenic. The blood sees it as a massive injury and reacts instantly.
Clot.
Boom! A huge thrombus forms on top of the ruptured plaque. The vessel, which was 50% blocked a minute ago, is now 100% occluded.
And that's a massive heart attack or a massive stroke. No warning.
That's it. Sudden death.
That is terrifying. It really highlights why statin drugs work so well. I, like many people, used to think they just lowered your cholesterol number. But they do so much more, don't they?
So much more. Their primary benefit is probably not even the LDL lowering. They are potent anti-inflammatory drugs. They cool down that fire in the wall. They reduce the number of foam cells. They allow the smooth muscle cells to lay down more collagen and thicken the fibrous cap. They stabilize the plaque.
I'll turn a bomb into a rock.
They turn a vulnerable plaque into a stable, scarred-down, concrete-like plaque. It might still block the flow a bit, but it's not going to pop.
You would much rather have a rock in your artery than a bomb.
Precisely.
All right, that is a fantastic overview of the inflammatory side of things. Now let's look at the other major insult, the pressure side. Section 4, hypertensive vascular disease, the pressure cooker.
Hypertension is just ubiquitous, and the vast majority, 90 to 95% of it, is what we call essential hypertension.
Which is just doctor speak for we don't really know the exact cause.
Exactly. It's multifactorial genetics, environment, diet, sodium handling, stress. It's complicated.
Yeah.
But even if we don't know the root cause, we know exactly what that relentless pressure does to the vessels over time. It forces them to change. And Robbins describes two main patterns of arteriolosclerosis. This is specifically damage to the small vessels, the arterioles.
Okay, so let's differentiate them.
The first and more common type is hyaline arteriolosclerosis. This is the hallmark of benign hypertension, though benign is a relative term here. It just means it happens slowly over many years.
What does it look like? I love the visual descriptions in pathology.
It looks like pink glass.
Ah.
Under the microscope, the wall of the arteriole loses its normal structure and just looks like a homogeneous pink glassy ring.
How does it get that way? What's the mechanism?
The sustained high pressure physically forces plasma proteins like albumin and fibrinogen to leak across the injured endothelium and get pushed into the vessel wall.
So it's literally pushing blood proteins into the brickwork of the wall.
Exactly. At the same time, the stressed smooth muscle cells respond by producing more extracellular matrix. The combination of leaked protein and extra matrix creates this hyaline or glassy appearance.
And the consequence of the wall getting thick and glassy
Is that the lumen gets narrow, the pipe gets smaller and smaller, and it stars the downstream tissue of blood. This is the classic mechanism of what we call benign nephrosclerosis.
The granular scarred kidney we see in older hypertensive patients.
Yes. If you look at the surface of a kidney from someone with long-standing hypertension, it looks shrunken and bumpy, like the surface of a green leather football. And that's because thousands of these little arterioles have glassed over and choked off the blood supply to tiny patches of kidney tissue, which then die and scar down. The kidney slowly suffocates over decades.
Okay, so that's the slow burn version. A second type is hyperplastic arteriolosclerosis. This sounds more aggressive.
It is much more aggressive. This is the hallmark of malignant or severe, rapidly progressing hypertension. We're talking about blood pressures of, say, 200 over 120, a true medical emergency.
What happens to the vessel then?
The pressure is so high, so acute, that the smooth muscle cells go into panic mode. They're trying to reinforce the wall before it bursts. So they multiply, they proliferate in layers, concentrically.
And the visual here is the classic onion skin appearance.
Yes, it is unmistakable. Under the microscope, the vessel looks exactly like a tiny sliced onion, layer upon layer upon layer of smooth muscle cells and duplicated basement membrane.
But by adding all those layers inward, they completely close off the pipe.
They obliterate the lumen. And frequently, this is accompanied by fibrinoid necrosis. The vessel wall itself literally dies and gets impregnated with pink fibrin strands. This is what causes rapid end organ damage. You see this in malignant hypertension, where patients can go into acute kidney failure in a matter of days or weeks.
I want to touch on the clinical integration here because it's not just the kidneys. Underwood makes a point to mention the eyes and the brain.
The retina is special. It is the only place in the human body where you can look directly at blood vessels in real time, non-invasively, and see the pathology happen.
With an ophthalmoscope.
Right. You look in, and in a patient with severe hypertension, you can see narrowed copper wire arterioles. You can see flame-shaped hemorrhages. You can see cotton wool spots, which are actually tiny areas of retinal infarction, little strokes in the eye.
And in the brain, this is the one that really scares me.
In the brain, chronic hypertension causes two major problems. In the small vessels, it can lead to lacunar infarcts, tiny strokes deep in the brain. But it also causes these tiny defects called Charcot-Bouchard microaneurysms.
What are those exactly?
They are tiny, fragile balloonings in the very small penetrating vessels deep in the brain, in places like the basal ganglia or the thalamus. They are like weak spots on an old bicycle tire. They just sit there silently for years.
Till they don't.
Until one day, there's a spike in blood pressure, and
Yeah.
one of them ruptures. And that's a catastrophic hemorrhagic stroke. a brain bleed deep inside the brain. They're often devastating.
Which brings us perfectly to the concept of things breaking under pressure. Section 5. Aneurysms and dissection. Failures of structure.
This is where the wall gives up completely.
Well, let's define our terms first, because I think people often confuse these two. An aneurysm is a ballooning, right?
Correct. An aneurysm is a localized abnormal dilation of a blood vessel. The vessel wall bulges out. A true aneurysm, which is what we're mostly talking about, involves all three layers of the wall. The wall is intact, but it's stretched out and thin, like an overinflated water balloon.
So what causes the wall to lose its strength and give up? Why doesn't it just hold its shape?
It's a war. It's a constant battle inside the vessel wall between matrix synthesis and matrix degradation. Your vessel wall is constantly being remodeled and repaired. You have enzymes called MMPs, matrix metalloproteinases, that act like a demolition crew, breaking down old scaffolding like collagen and elastin.
And you have inhibitors to keep them in check.
Exactly. You have TIMP tissue inhibitors of metalloproteinases that are supposed to stop the demolition crew from going too far. It's a balance of power.
And an aneurysm.
The balance is lost. The MMPs win. The demolition crew goes wild, often fueled by inflammation. They chew up the elastic tissue and collagen much faster than it can be repaired. The wall thins out, weakens, and starts to bulge under the constant pressure.
And the causes for this differ by location. This is a classic board question distinction.
It is a core concept. If you see an abdominal aortic aneurysm, or a AAA, below the kidneys, what is the number one cause?
Atherosclerosis.
Atherosclerosis, FR. The plaque forms on the intima. It creates a physical barrier, blocking nutrient flow from the blood to the inner wall. It compresses the media starves. Plus, the plaque itself is a hotbed of inflammation, releasing those MMPs that degrade the wall. The wall weakens and balloons out in the abdomen.
But if the aneurysm is in the thoracic aorta, up in the chest,
then you need to think differently. The number one cause there is hypertension. The constant high pressure just mechanically wears out the wall. Or you need to think about genetics.
like Marfan syndrome.
Marfan syndrome or Loeys-Dietz syndrome. These are diseases of the connective tissue itself. Often they're caused by defects in the TGF-beta signaling pathway.
And TGF-beta regulates tissue repair.
Exactly. If that signaling is broken, you make poor quality, weak elastic tissue from birth. The aorta just can't handle the normal pulse pressure, and it dilates over time.
Okay, now for the other catastrophe, aortic dissection. This is different. This isn't a slow ballooning, it's a sudden tear.
It is catastrophic.
Yeah.
And the patient's story is completely different. Aneurysms are often silent, painless, found by accident until they rupture. Dissection is sudden, agonizing, tearing pain.
So what is physically happening in a dissection?
A tear forms in the intima, the inner lining. Blood, at high pressure, finds that tear and surges into the wall itself. It gets into the media and literally splits the layers of the muscle apart, like separating the layers of plywood.
It unzips the wall from the inside.
It unzips it.
You know.
And it creates what we call a false lumen, a new blood-filled channel inside the wall that runs parallel to the real one. The aorta essentially becomes a double-barrel shotgun.
What is the pre-existing condition that allows this? What makes the media weak enough to split apart like that?
The key pathology term is cystic medial degeneration. A bit of a misnomer. There are no true cysts. But what it means is that the elastic tissue and the smooth muscle cells in the media have fallen apart and been replaced by pools of amorphous, gooey matrix material. The wall loses its integrity.
And here's where we connect back to the vasa vasorum we talked about way back in the intro.
I was waiting for this connection. This is the why.
This is the why.
In chronic hypertension, what happens to those tiny little vessels, the vasa vasorum, that are supposed to be feeding the aorta's outer wall?
They undergo that hyaline arteriolosclerosis we just discussed. They get thick and glassy.
They narrow, they get choked off. So they can't deliver enough oxygen and nutrients to the outer part of the aorta's own wall.
So the smooth muscle cells in the aorta die. The elastic fibers degrade because they aren't being maintained.
The wall becomes ischemic and weak. It's essentially rotting from the outside in because its own life-giving blood vessels are diseased from the high pressure.
That is the setup.
That is the setup. Then a sudden spike in blood pressure creates a tear in the intima, and that high-pressure blood surges into that weakened, rot-filled plane in the media and just rips it apart.
And the symptoms are classic. That sudden, severe, tearing chest pain that radiates straight through to the back between the shoulder blades.
Unmistakable. And the immediate danger is that the dissection can rupture outwards. If it ruptures into the pericardial sac around the heart, the sac fills with blood, it crushes the heart, that's cardiac tamponade, and the patient dies instantly. It is the ultimate failure of structure under force.
Okay, moving from structural failure to a direct immune attack. Section 6, vasculitis. This topic always feels overwhelming to students because there are just so many names to memorize.
It is an absolute laundry list if you let it be.
Yeah.
But the best way to organize it, the way Robbins does, is not by name, but by vessel size and by mechanism, and even better, by the story of the patient.
I like that approach. Let's use patient avatars. So let's break it down. Large vessel vasculitis.
Two main players here that you have to know. Giant cell or temporal arteritis and Takayasu arteritis.
Okay, give me the avatar for giant cell arteritis. Who is this patient?
Picture a 75-year-old grandmother. She comes into the clinic complaining of a new splitting headache, usually on one side of her head. But here's the weird specific detail. Her scalp hurts when she brushes her hair.
Temporal tenderness.
Exactly. And maybe her jaw hurts when she chews. We call that jaw claudication. The pathology is a granulomatous inflammation, these little nodules of organized immune cells attacking the temporal arteries and other cranial vessels.
And what is the terrifying risk here? Why is this an emergency?
Blindness, sudden irreversible blindness. If that inflammation tracks back and hits the ophthalmic artery, the blood supply to the retina is cut off. The lights go out, and they do not come back on.
So you have to treat it immediately.
You treat with high-dose steroids on suspicion alone. Do not wait for the biopsy to come back.
Okay, then Takayasu. The pulseless disease.
A completely different avatar. Picture a young woman, maybe 30 years old, often of Asian descent. She comes in with vague systemic symptoms, fever, fatigue, weight loss. You go to take her pulse at her wrist, and there is nothing. It's gone.
Wow.
Or it's very weak. And her blood pressure is different in each arm. That's because the inflammation, which under the microscope looks very similar to giant cell, that's granulomatous, is attacking the aortic arch and the great vessels coming off it. It scars them down and narrows them so much that the arms lose their blood supply.
Okay, large vessels done. Now, medium vessel vasculitis.
The classic one here is polyarteritis nodosa, or PAN.
What's the story for PAN?
This is a necrotizing vasculitis. It kills segments of the vessel wall. The avatar is a middle-aged man, and the key association you have to remember is a history of hepatitis B.
Hepatitis B.
Yes, immune complexes of viral antigens and antibodies get stuck in the vessel walls and trigger the inflammation. This patient might present with bloody stool from gut ischemia, maybe kidney failure, maybe nerve pain, skin ulcers. It hits multiple systems. But here is the key differentiator. His lungs are fine.
PAN spares the lungs. That's a huge clue.
If you see lung involvement, like someone coughing up blood, it is not PAN.
And the other big medium vessel one is Kawasaki disease.
This is a pediatric emergency. The avatar is a toddler under 5 years old. They have a high fever for days that won't break with Tylenol. They have a strawberry tongue, bright red and bumpy. They have red eyes, a rash on their palms and soles, and then later their skin starts to peel.
It's also called mucocutaneous lymph node syndrome.
Right. But the danger isn't the rash or the fever. It's the heart. Kawasaki has a bizarre and dangerous affinity for the coronary arteries. It can cause them to balloon out into massive aneurysms. A 4-year-old can have a heart attack.
Just devastating. Okay, moving down to small vessel vasculitis. This is where those antibodies, the ANCAs, come into play.
Right. The ANCA-associated vasculitides. These are driven by autoantibodies that cause neutrophils to attack the walls of small vessels.
First one, granulomatosis with polyangiitis, which used to be called Wegener's.
The avatar here is a middle-aged man who presents with a chronic sinus infection that just will not heal. Maybe a saddle nose deformity. He's also coughing up blood, and his urine is turning red because his kidneys are failing.
The classic triad, nasopharynx, lungs, and kidneys.
And his blood test will be positive for CANCA.
And how does that differ from microscopic polyangiitis?
Similar story. The lungs and the kidneys are involved, but typically no sinus or nose involvement. The blood test is positive for PANCA. And critically, if you biopsy the lesion, there are no granulomas. That's what distinguishes it from Wegener's.
And finally, a very distinct category that Underwood highlights, thromborangitis obliterans or Berger disease.
This is the smoker's disease, period. The avatar is a young man, maybe 35, who is a very heavy smoker. 2 packs a day. He comes in with excruciating pain in his fingers and toes, which are starting to turn black.
Gangrene.
Yes. It's thought that toxins from the tobacco smoke are directly injuring the vessels in the extremities, causing intense inflammation and clots that have little micro abscesses inside them. It's incredibly painful.
And the only cure?
Stop smoking.
That's it.
That's it. Yes, stop completely. If he doesn't, they will amputate the fingers, then the hand, then the arm. The disease is absolutely relentless as long as he continues to smoke.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground. I mean, from the microscopic activation of a single endothelial cell all the way to the catastrophic unzipping of the entire aorta. Let's try to synthesize this for the listener. What is the through line here? What connects all these diseases?
The through line is that the vessel is responsive. It is an active organ. It's a mirror of your systemic health. It responds to lipids, it responds to pressure, it responds to toxins, and it responds to immune signals. We started with the delicate sensing endothelium. We saw how lipids and inflammation turn it into a festering plaque and atherosclerosis, a chronic wound that never truly heals. We saw how relentless pressure remodels it into a useless onion skin or glass tube in hypertension, a desperate attempt to contain the force that ends up suffocating the very organ it's trying to supply. We saw how its fundamental matrix rots and balloons in aneurysms. And we saw the body's own immune system turn against it in vasculitis.
It really emphasizes that so what question. Why does this all matter to a clinician or a student?
Because understanding vascular pathology is understanding the supply lines of the entire body. If the vessel fails, the organ dies. It doesn't matter how healthy your brain cells are if the carotid artery is full of gruel and can't deliver oxygen. Pathology explains the clinical presentation. The tearing pain of dissection is the literal physical separation of the aortic layers. The claudication or cramping pain in atherosclerosis is the simple, brutal math of supply not meeting demand. The purpura, or rash, in small vessel vasculitis is blood physically leaking out of inflamed, damaged capillaries.
It connects the image under the microscope to the patient sitting in front of you. It makes the symptoms logical, not just a list to be memorized.
Exactly. That's the whole point of learning this.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought to leave our listeners with. We talked about age-related changes, the hardening, the arteriosclerosis, the loss of elastin. We sort of assume that arteries just get old, but is vascular aging inevitable?
That is a billion-dollar question in modern research, isn't it? Now that we know it's not some vague process of decay, but that it's driven by specific identifiable signaling pathways, TGF-beta, MMPs, inflammation, the NLRP3 inflammasome, can we arrest it? If we could find a way to keep the endothelium in its quiet, happy, basal state, keep it slippery and calm, could we stop our conduits from aging?
Could we live to be 120 with the arteries of a 20-year-old?
That's the dream. It might not be about extending lifespan, but extending health span. What if the fountain of youth isn't some magic potion, but just really healthy endothelium?
Something to mull over.
Indeed.
As always, we strongly encourage you to go back to the source material. Open Robbins Chapter 11 for those beautiful, deep molecular diagrams. Look at the inflammasome pathway. Trace the migration of the smooth muscle cells. Then look at Underwood Chapter 13 for the crisp clinical summaries and the real-world context. Use this conversation as your map to navigate the text.
Reading remains essential.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.